got Hot makes a statement in his journal. When you read the journal, he says, look, I looked at my right, I looked at my left, I'm an island unto myself. There is nobody else here. He starts to pull back. His man said, all right, let's pull back to the house. The British bring out 10 pieces of artillery. Six pounders that were stuck between the units. There were two 12-pounders that set up on the hill in front of. On this farm in 1768, he ended up farming this field below us. It's a lot like it was at that time period. He had corn, wheat, flax, potatoes. He had all kinds of different crops that he was growing there, as well as he had this rough farmed from this spot to the tree line to the back. All right? I call it rough farm because he left the trees there and just girdled it, because what will happen is they'll take the bark off the tree, it will die eventually. He just went around it at that point in time. Now, Freeman went up to, I believe, Fort Edward, which is north of here, and met Burgoyne. He brought his whole family. He had six or eight kids, his wife. They left this place and went up there to fight alongside Burgoyne. So on the 19th of September, he was a guide that brought them here. He fought here, and his son. Freeman had a 12-year-old son that fought on this field on the 19th of September. He was discharged the day after because of what he saw at that point. Now, about 12 o'clock in the afternoon on the 19th of September, Morgan had been ordered out. I believe he came from that tree line to the back, and it was so, the roads are trails, so they can only march two abreast. So they got across this field, got to the fence, the house, the barn is where the cannon is across that walk. They got here, and who's coming up the trail or coming out of the tree line is Major Forbes with the 9th Regiment. He has about 100 guys. As soon as Morgan's guys see him, they fire into him. They kill a number of them or wound them at that point. Forbes' group goes back into the tree line and goes down. Now, Burgoyne's center column, you see where the tour road is in this lower field? In that tree line is where the main body of the soldiers are located. The 9th, the 20th, 21st, and 62nd regiments. They go back in. Morgan's guys firing at them as much as they can. What Morgan doesn't know is, to the back, behind you, where Brayman's Redoubt was, remember we talked about it early? That is where Simon Fraser is located. Fraser sees what's going on. He sends some of the 24th, Native Americans, and some loyalists into the woods with a 6-pounder. They hit Morgan's left flank, scatter Morgan's men. Now, Morgan uses a turkey call to bring his guys back. I think they ended up at the far end of the field. Now, at that point, once the firing stops, and the last firing was a firing of a cannon by the British because their men are green. They haven't fought a battle for the most part. And so when the retreating 9th Regiment comes back in, scares these guys to death, and they start to fire. They have to fire a cannon to end up stopping it. Now, from 12:30 in the afternoon until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the British end up coming from that position, getting ready for battle, and they get up here. at this point, and they go all the way to the parking lot. It was treed at that point. It was treed. So the 9th Regiment should have been to the far right. They couldn't fit. They dropped them back off into reserve, into the tree line to your back. The 21st Regiment would have been from the parking lot over to here. The 62nd Regiment would have been from the halfway across there, the field to this side, to the edge of this hill, and the 20th Regiment was down below. Now, Morgan's guys are scattered back. We don't know where they are at that point. But that bloody knoll that we talked about on the way in, across the field where that hill is, Henry Dearborn was the tail end of that, and that's where they ended up. The 62nd Regiment was ordered to attack, and that's what they do. They start marching in that direction, about 2:30 in the afternoon. They get about halfway across, and out of the woods to the southern end of this field came the 1st New Hampshire. They came across the path. They fought for about 20 minutes. The 1st New Hampshire gets pretty beaten up. They retreat. They go back into the tree line. They come across the 3rd New Hampshire. So Colonel Scammell says of the 3rd New Hampshire to Colonel Silly, "Where you going?" He said, "I'm retreating. We're pretty beaten up." And Scammell said, "Well, we're going to the battlefield." And so what happens is Scammell and the 1st come back too. So the 1st New Hampshire, you see this tree line? It's almost like a crescent. The 1st New Hampshire, the 3rd New Hampshire, eventually Cook's, Connecticut's were there. The 2nd New Hampshire. The line went along the tree line up over the hill into the Marshall Field at that point. Basically, you got 2 battles going on. You got Burgoyne directing the battle on this field. You got Arnold and Fraser on this side directing the battle on the far side. The idea is that each is trying to get around the flank of the other. The fighting starts consistently from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon until about 7 o'clock at night that they went across this. There were 2 6-pounders that set up on that knoll where the monument is. They were taken 5 times by the Americans. 5 times. The dead and wounded, the dead were where they were on the field, but the wounded were brought back here for treatment. They were all around here. You could not walk around here. You weren't going to step on a body. They brought them in as much as they could into Freeman's house. Didn't last for very long. They brought the bodies out. They went across this field on at least 5 or 6 times. The British would push the Americans into the tree line in the far end of the field, and the Americans at that point would allow them in and suck them back further and further, then counterattack and kill them in the woods, and then push them back out again across the field. This goes on all day long till about 7 o'clock at night. We know Fraser's fighting in the Marshall Field. We know that Burgoyne's fighting over here. We know that really the 2 guys making the directions are Arnold and Fraser. 7 o'clock at night, the Americans are pushed the British back. The Americans are to the Freeman house. The group we have to talk about is Riedesel. Riedesel had been sending at least 5 messages all day long to Burgoyne. Finally, what happens is Burgoyne, late afternoon, sends a message, "Come, I need help." He is down on the river, and the river is about 2 miles from here. What he had done in preparation is he had started to bring his men in groups. He'd put one group in to establish, he'd bring another group in, and another group, because he could hear the firing. And when he finally got the message, he got his 1,500, he had more than that, but he brought 1,500 men with him. And they got up here. At the edge of in the corner of the field to the right, he comes out, he sees, and I haven't talked about it, Morgan's guys are in this clump of trees right here in front of us. They are having a field day with the 20th Regiment because the 20th can't dig them out. And he's also having a field day with the 62nd and the artillery. The 62nd went onto this battlefield with 260 guys. At the end of the day, they got 60 guys left. That's it. And it's a lot to do with Morgan's guys. So Riedesel sends in 700 men to cut off Morgan's retreat into the woods. The others he brings across that field, and he brings Captain Bosch, who was important on October 7th. He unloads his guns and he fires into the Americans right here. There's a great scene where the British and the Germans get on the tow lines to bring that gun up over this hill. Because when he did, he fires across that field into what is left of the Americans on the far side. When that occurred, the battle pretty much is over at that point. Now, the next day, the British sleep on their arms here. The next day, the British have to make a decision. What are they going to do? Are you going to attack, or are you going to clean up the dead and take care of the wounded? That's what he decides to do. So the morning of the 21st, he gets a message from Henry Clinton in New York saying, I think you need some help. If you do, send a message back. I'll be here 10 days, within 10 days of when the message comes through. Burgoyne said, come back. He sent out messengers to do that, and they do reach it. That makes him decide he's going to dig in, and that's exactly what he does. The red and white pickets represent a log fortified wall. See where it is?
Yeah.
It's all the way down, goes around this hill, comes all the way back through. You see where this little low spot is? That was a road that ran through that. That was a sally port. That's the entrance into a redoubt.
Oh,
it's called
okay.
the Valkyries Redoubt. Then it picks back up on the other side on that little knoll, comes all the way back around. This is a light infantry station. 400 men were stationed here at that point. The British, this is their advanced post. They are positioned here. This whole field would have been, white tents, all the way to the tree line where there is a ravine, would have been pickets or sentinels in that tree line. And then on the other side, they pick up their men again. You would have had the 20th Regiment on the far side there, and the Germans would have been located in that next field, which I'll point out as we go through. Now, Burgoyne, he's been here 3 weeks. He's low on supplies. He's got to do something. He sends out a reconnaissance and force. We saw where they were. We know what happened at Barber's Wheatfield. The British are chased back into this fortification. Now, the Americans take Bloody Knoll, and they take this satellite position over here, but they cannot take this. You've got 8 to 10 guns here. You've got probably 1,000 or more men here because they all flow back in here at that point in time. Arnold's on the field. He sees what's going on. He comes to the front of this, goes, and on the corner of the field there, he sees some of Nixon's men. Nixon was out of Massachusetts. And what he does at that point is he takes those men and he moves up what would be the Tour Road today to the next fortification. And that's where we'll pick up.
He wounded his leg, huh?
Yep. We go to the top.
Our military governor photos. Did Arnold go to the British then?
We'll talk. Let me finish. We'll get to it.
Yeah.
Can't do it, and they are captured. The Americans hold this. When the Americans hold this position, Burgoyne decides he's going to retreat because without this position, they can be surrounded. And so this is the critical moment of the battle. On the night of October 7th, Second battle, we're going to retreat back to the river. And that's our next stop and our last stop.
Okay.
I will meet you at the car.
Okay.
All right? Take your time on your way back. All right. Well, we are at our final stop. This is the Great Redoubt. It's called the Great Redoubt because there were 4 pieces of artillery that overlooked the American river fortifications. You would have had at that point 150 to 200 bateaux, if not more, that would have been lined up on the river. There was a bridge of boats from this spot all the way to the other side so they could scavenge what they were hoping for. Down below us was the British hospital, the baggage, the artillery, women and children, Native Americans, a certain amount of loyalists, and the 47th Regiment. This was the overlook of the river. There was a central battery, redoubt, and then a smaller one that did not have artillery. On the night of October 7th, the whole British Army came back here and camped across the top of these hills, down below. Now, Simon Fraser, this picture that they're looking at that was drawn, Simon Fraser was wounded, of course, on October 7th. Now, it ends up that he is brought to the hospital and then taken down that path to a house called the Taylor House. It's in that wood line, it's still marked. It's not there, but the outline of it is marked.
He was pretty gravely.
He was shot through the intestine. Well, he's on top of the horse. When he got shot, he got hit here. It went through the intestine and opened him up at that point. He ends up being brought into the house with General Rita Zell's wife was located. She had set the table for the generals to come back and have a meal. The soldiers come in, they take down the table, take down the silverware, that type of thing. And what they end up doing at that moment in time, they end up bringing him to bed, and then he comes in after. The surgeon looks at it. The hospital, of course, as I said, was just down below us. They had to move that down further to protect the wounded. 6 o'clock, they came out of the Taylor House. They came down the path and up this hill. It was a military funeral. The officers and their men were here. Cannonballs were flying over the top. Dust was flying up.
You drive on the tour road, you check out all the different sites, and then you know that's up too. That's like the best houses in the world. That was Army's headquarters. Norton's Corps of Riflemen, infantry right up here. That's where they came from. There's a wayside exhibit that talks about that. That's not too. So go to the kind of north side of the hill, you'll see a sign dedicated to the riflemen and light infantry. That's cool. And certainly your ancestor was part of that. So your ancestor was in Captain Gabriel Long's company of riflemen. Now, you mentioned Porterfield. Captain Porterfield, and when you said the name, I heard the name, but it's like, there's a bajillion captains in the army, and I don't know which captain is which, with what regiment if they're not in this army.
Beautiful view up here, isn't it?
And the officers are drafted out of various
Working on it.
to serve in this unit, which is again a professional thing. It lasted into 1770.
Were you safe where you
We're
were?
on the coast.
Anyway,
We on the coast, but
Morgan, one of his
they don't use John.
new rifle.
Yeah. We saw a fellow injured on one of the news stations last night. A helicopter
And so one of the eight countries was trained by
coming in
Captain
and
Porterfield.
find people in
So here's a payroll
near
Captain Gabriel Long's company.
for 2 miles away. He could see near flashing, so he got over to the manufacturer and he could prove trips and so forth.
They didn't create a muster roll for Morgan's professional or because they were still in muster on their parent company muster rolls. That's right. They called it on command. the payrolls being generated are all, you know, for Morgan's Core riflemen, but they're being still mustered technically in their parent company. So you could, if it still exists, go into the National Archives, go to the 11th Virginia Regiment, go to Porterfield Company, find his muster roll covering this time frame. Your ancestor name will be on that muster roll, but it will say on command or with warriors.
He did an affidavit in 1880.
Okay, yes.
And there was questions about it. He was read, because he read these fairly well documented. And there's things that didn't quite make sense. Like he said he was a child. He was discharged in 1780. But there's, we have to go back. Follow later again at Calvin's. There's no copies of enlistment documents. Discharge, completed. The U-turn.
Oh, was he part of the Canada invasion? Oh, okay, wait a minute, so it's more than, and then maybe as you know, Morgan was captured too. Morgan was paroled in December of 76. Yeah.
Which is not far from
Right.
where we're at.
Hello?
Hi, Barbara.
Yes?
Hi, this is Valerie here in Siebel.
Yeah, hi Valerie. I'm in New York. We're on vacation right now, and I was watching a movie about the Saratoga.
attempt to isolate New England and end the rebellion, the British launched 2 invasion forces from Canada in the summer of 1777. Both forces intended to combine their strengths and capture Albany. In June, Lieutenant General John Burgoyne's army easily captured Forts Ticonderoga and Independence, forcing the Army of the United States to retreat. Burgoyne won the battles of Hubbardton and Fort Anne, captured Forts George and Edward, but was defeated in the Battle of Bennington in August. That defeat stalled his advance until supplies were collected, which took precious time. In July, Lieutenant Colonel St. Ledger's army found unexpected resistance at Fort Schuyler. The British decimated a militia force near Oriskany, but at great loss to their own force, they eventually retreated. Burgoyne, still intent on reaching Albany, collected enough supplies and crossed the Hudson River on September 13th. The day before, Major General Horatio Gates's newly reinforced 8,100-man American army encamped at Bemis Heights, chosen for the strategic advantages provided by the natural landscape. To an invading army like Burgoyne's, the funnel-like defile created by the closeness of the bluffs and river severely limited maneuverability and tactical options. Gates's army fortified the valley, bluffs, and rising high ground west to the Nielsen farm on the summit, where most of the army was encamped to protect that vulnerable area. By the 17th, the British encamped 3 miles north of Bemis Heights. On the morning of September 19th, the British launched an attack in columns aimed at the Americans' weakest point, the summit. The American response would come to determine the fate of the entire war. Brigadier General Simon Fraser's 3,000-man force of British, Germans, Loyalists, American Indians, and Canadians comprised the right column and moved west before turning southward. The center column, accompanied by Burgoyne himself and consisting of 1,700 British redcoats commanded by Brigadier General James Hamilton, followed Fraser for a short distance, then turned south on the road leading into the Great Ravine. The left column was drawn from 2,500 German and British troops under Major General Baron von Riedesel, followed by support departments such as the hospital and women and children. The Americans had destroyed every bridge on the road to Bemis Heights. Progress was slow. Learning of a British movement, Colonel Morgan's riflemen and Major Dearborn's light infantry were ordered to scout and skirmish with the enemy. They rushed toward Freeman's farm. Morgan's riflemen were posted on a hill where Freeman's abandoned house and barn stood. At about noon, the 100-man British picket belonging to the center column emerged from the woods. Rifle fire exploded from behind fences and trees, forcing the British to flee. At that moment, infantry from Fraser's column that had been ordered towards the gunfire appeared on Morgan's left flank. The riflemen were quickly routed. At about 2 o'clock, the 4 British regiments of Hamilton's center column, the 20th, 62nd, 21st, and 9th, moved out of the woods and onto the clearing, where they formed up in line of battle. Major General Benedict Arnold ordered Brigadier General Enoch Poor to support Morgan with the 1st New Hampshire Regiment, which moved quickly and formed in the skirt of woods. At about 3 o'clock, the 62nd Regiment advanced toward them with 2 6-pound cannons. The 1st New Hampshire attacked, but fell back. They were soon rallied with the arrival of the 3rd New Hampshire Regiment. Morgan's riflemen, having regrouped, moved behind a heavily wooded ravine on the extreme right of the American line and took their aim at the officers and men of the 20th Regiment in the open field across from them. Perceiving that the 2 New Hampshire regiments were not enough of a reinforcement, Arnold ordered Colonel Cook's regiment of Connecticut militia and the 2nd New Hampshire Regiment to the field. With this reinforcement, the American line of battle resembled a crescent, with the British 62nd Regiment in the opening between. In response, the 62nd Regiment refused its 2 left flank companies. The 2 6-pounders were posted in the angle. The 21st Royal North British Fusiliers were brought up to protect the 62nd Regiment's right flank, and Burgoyne ordered the 9th Regiment to withdraw to the wooded road. Dearborn's light infantry was tasked with defending the American left wing. Fraser sent his 24th Regiment into the woods to eliminate them. The British were repulsed and fell back onto the open field of the Marshall Farm. The 24th Regiment reformed, moved to the northern side of the field, wheeled into the woods, and fought Dearborn's men from tree to tree. From their hidden and naturally protected position in the woods, Morgan's riflemen on the right of the line found that they could also shoot at the flank and even the rear of the 62nd Regiment. As the grueling battle wore on, the 2 British cannons fell silent as most of the crews were killed or wounded. The 62nd Regiment inflicted heavy casualties on Cook's militia, posted between the riflemen and the 1st New Hampshire Regiment. Poor ordered a newly arrived Massachusetts Continental reinforcement, commanded by Major Hull, to relieve the beaten retiring militia. The 62nd made an attack meant to exploit the apparent weakness of the American line, but was checked and fell back. With Hull's men in pursuit. The 20th Regiment rushed into the woods to prevent Morgan's riflemen from shooting at the backs of their retreating comrades. The 62nd Regiment was put in order, counterattacked, and forced Hull's men to fall back to their original position. To support Dearborn and protect the left flank of his main battle line, Arnold sent in Colonel Latimer's Regiment of Connecticut Militia and the last 2 regiments of Poor's Brigade, the 2nd and 4th New York. While Latimer's regiment and the 4th New York moved to support Dearborn, the 2nd New York fell in with light infantry from Fraser's column. The New Yorkers pulled back and retreated. Finally, Arnold committed his last 4 regiments, those of Brigadier General Ebenezer Learned's brigade, against the British and German grenadiers. With Gates's lead, Colonel Marshall's Massachusetts Continentals of Patterson's brigade were also sent into the fray. After hours of no communication, von Riedesel received an order from Burgoyne to strengthen positions along the river and attack the Americans at Freeman's Farm with all the troops he could spare. Von Riedesel took personal command of his own regiment, a detachment of the Regiment von Race, and 2 of Captain Puish's 6-pound cannons, and proceeded toward the fight. Near dusk, the Germans reached a point of high ground on the edge of the farm. Puish's artillery was brought to the hills on the other side of the field where the entire British line was being pushed back. The British rallied, and von Riedesel ordered his Germans to join the 21st Royal North British Fusiliers, which moved to the eastern side of the field, and forced their way through the woods on the Americans' right flank. The Americans, unable to withstand this new attack, withdrew under cover of darkness. While the Army of the United States technically lost the Battle of Freeman's Farm, Gates still blocked Burgoyne's only route to Albany. However, because of the timely receipt of a secret letter from the British command in the city of New York offering the assistance of a diversionary force, Burgoyne decided to stay and build defensive fortifications. The Americans continued to expand and strengthen their defenses. Militia reinforcements from New York and New England arrived, dramatically increasing Gates's army to about 12,500 officers and men. Over the 2.5 weeks, however, Burgoyne came to realize that he could wait no longer for assistance that didn't seem to be coming. He decided to send a strong force to reconnoiter the supposedly weak American left flank instead. On October 7th, a force of 1,700 men marched from the British camp through the Marshall Farm to an as-yet unexplored farm field. An American picket was forced out of the house there, and the British forces formed on a crooked road that cut across 2 adjacent fields. With both flanks refused, the probing force waited while foragers with wagons came to harvest wheat discovered there. Gates ordered an immediate attack. Poor's brigade marched to the Chatfield Farm clearing. While Morgan's riflemen and Dearborn's light infantry moved quickly toward a wooded height commanding the British right flank. Poor's brigade proceeded toward the ditch of a wooded ravine on the British left. Just past 4 o'clock, Poor's brigade attacked and routed the British grenadiers. The German troops next to them also fled into the bushes behind them. With the immediate collapse of the left and left center of the line, the 24th Regiment was ordered to move and support the left wing. Morgan's corps had already ascended a wooded hill, and upon hearing the gunfire between Poor's brigade and British Grenadiers, Morgan's men rushed down the hill, charging the British light infantry, which fell back. The British reformed to make a stand, but soon withdrew to the wheat field, reportedly due to a misunderstanding of orders. The 24th Regiment, with the assistance of some rallied British Grenadiers and German troops, temporarily checked Poor's further advance. However, the British line on the right was virtually non-existent. Learned's brigade attacked Burgoyne's center, held by German troops. They too fell back to the wheat field behind them. Hoyt, with his 2 long 6-pounders, kept Learned's men from making an all-out assault on the field. But after finding that the main line had fallen back, Hoyt withdrew his artillery to a small log wall in front of the house. Hoyt placed his 2 cannons on both ends of the wall, firing at both Poor's and Learned's troops. Morgan's riflemen moved through the woods, while Dearborn's light infantry rushed to the main field of battle to attack the cannons posted at the house. The Germans and British protecting the house and fled. With the approach of overwhelming American forces, Hoyt and his men abandoned their post and retreated. Dearborn's men rushed for the house, captured the cannons there, and found themselves in an advantageous location, behind the remnants of Burgoyne's main line, which was still battling Poor's brigade. Dearborn's men fired upon them from about 80 yards distant. The British and remaining Germans retreated. As all British forces retreated from the wheat field, Fraser, conspicuous and spirited, attempted to cover the retreat while in the open field of the Marshall Farm. He was mortally wounded. The British rear guard collapsed and
All
withdrew.
set? We're ready to go.
Poor's men, pursuing the retreating force, soon found themselves battling the British and Germans at Valcarras Redoubt. While Poor was able to capture 2 small satellite forts in front of the redoubt itself held. During this action, Morgan's and Dearborn's men united at the base of a steep banked hill in front of another fort, Bremen Redoubt. Colonels Jackson's and Bailey's Massachusetts Continentals moved onto the field and attacked 2 small cabins defended by Canadian militiamen. The Canadians soon scattered. Arnold joined his men, encouraging them to attack Bremen Redoubt through its open rear. Colonel Hutton, commanding 2 Massachusetts Continental regiments, arrived on the battlefield to attack the fort as well. As Arnold and the Massachusetts Continentals attacked the open rear and front right of the Bremen Redoubt, Morgan's and Dearborn's men rushed over the hill and charged. The attack was so quick and the distance to the fort so short that the Germans and Loyalists inside could do little more than fire and flee to their camp. They rallied to make a stand, but were soon routed and ran into the woods. Lieutenant Colonel Bremen was killed by his own men while trying to keep them from fleeing. Nightfall and the frenzied disarray of the Americans following their incredible victory after capturing Bremen Redoubt ended the fight. American troops garrisoned Bremen Redoubt throughout the night, while Burgoyne ordered his camp consolidated near the river. The next day, October 8th, American forces moved up the river valley with newly captured artillery and bombarded the British in their repositioned camp. After burying Fraser and leaving most of the wounded behind in the hospital, the British forces began their retreat up the valley towards Saratoga during a torrential downpour. On the 9th, the Army of the United States captured Burgoyne's old camp, fortifications, and the wounded, but Burgoyne's retreating army was not pursued. However, early the next day, Gates's army moved quickly to Saratoga and surrounded Burgoyne's army. After days of skirmishes and bombardment, Burgoyne decided to seek favorable terms for ending the fighting. Running dangerously low on food, he insisted on surrendering upon his own terms, and after days of lengthy meetings and delays, Burgoyne finally agreed to a convention, a surrender between himself and Gates. The extraordinary victory of Gates's army over Burgoyne at Saratoga, which resulted in the war-winning alliance with France, was made possible by what happened here on the bluffs of Saratoga Battlefield.